G'day, I'm Luke Bateman, and this is In the Good Books. I love fantasy. I absolutely love fantasy. I've been reading a lot of different genres lately, but no matter what happens, every time I return to fantasy, I just go, yeah, this is me. This is where I belong. But I also understand that not everyone feels comfortable cracking open a fantasy book, or they might not know where to start. It can seem quite literally like a foreign land, somewhere that you're not sure that you belong and somewhere that you're scared to journey into. And yet quite a few people always reach out to me and they ask what I'm interested in and how to start and how to get into fantasy. So in this episode, I'm playing the role of quest giver. I get to be Gandalf. I get to be on the other side of what I always wanted to be. I get to hand the quest over instead of experience the quest myself. And I'm pointing you to a path and hopefully down a direction of many long and wonderful adventures that will change you forever. Here are my personal recommendations for fantasy first, some that address common concerns and barriers people have against the genre, and others that show that fantasy might just be closer to what you're already reading than what you think, because truly, I think fantasy shows up in all writing and in all books. It is the basis of writing. It's the basis of a good story, fantasy. And don't worry to all my well-travelled fantasy friends, the ones like me, the ones who fantasy is your backyard. These, of course, are just incredible books. To start with, I actually want to take you back to the very beginning of my own fantasy journey. Now, I want to say about 10. I want to say about 9 or 10. This is the first the first series that I remember reading for myself, and it was the Children of the Lamp series by P.B. Kerr. Now, these books changed my life. These books began what is now a 2-decade plus long journey and will continue for the rest of my life. These were the origin story. These were the origin of fantasy. These were the seeds of fantasy that they sprouted within me and grew wings. And each book has a different title. Actually, you know what? Let me look up. Instead of not remembering what the titles of the book's called, I'm looking them up, and it is Children of the Lamp, The Bluesians of Babylon, The Akatan Adventure, The Cobra King of Kathmandu, and The Day of Jinn Warriors. They are some of the titles of these books. And just even reading those titles brings back such good memories for me. These books sit on my shelf. I love these books. They have such cool covers, and I was just drawn to them immediately. But the one memory I have, and I remember this so vividly, is I was 12. I remember exactly where I was. I was in Sydney. I was 12. I was down in Sydney for a football carnival. And I remember being engrossed in one of these books, and I was just like devouring it. It was all I cared about. And I had a game coming up that day. And I remember my old man, he said to me, he goes, stop reading your book. Get your head out of the book, because you need to focus on the game today. And I don't know what it is about, I just remember that exact moment. I remember that exact conversation. I remember just being like, piss off. I'll be fine. Forget about footy. This book is so much more important than footy. This story is so much more important than footy. And I always remember that so much because I went out and I killed it in that game. I destroyed it. I remember having a great game, and I just remember there's a piece of my mind that's like, you know what? Yeah, stuff you, Dad. I read that book. I didn't need to focus on the football. The football would look after itself. The most important thing for me was reading that book. Fantasy for me was, I grew up in the country. It was the real world. It was the real world. I was surrounded by real men who did real jobs and lived in the real world, and there wasn't room for fantasy. These books were the beginning of my journey into belonging, and where I felt just validated, where I felt so validated by these stories and by fantasy, and that was where my love of fantasy began. So if you've never read fantasy, if you're an adult and you want to dive into fantasy, I hope that inspires you. I hope that you find belonging and validation in fantasy worlds in the same way that I did, because that was my safe place when growing up. And it's still my safe place now as a 31-year-old man. Fantasy books are still my safe place. The safe harbor for me where I go when the world gets too much and when I need a break, which is often. Now, let me tell you where to start with fantasy. My first recommendation is none other than The Hobbit by Tolkien. I can guarantee that this is already a book that you probably know. If you've never read it, you've heard it, you've probably watched the movie, and it's many people's very first introduction to fantasy, and it's perfect for so many reasons. It was actually written by Tolkien for his grandchildren. This was written as a story for kids, so it's super accessible, super easy place to onboard yourself. Now, Bilbo Baggins, the main character, he has never left the quaint little town of the Shire. He's barely left his front gate. So the world that he encounters is not only new to us, it is new to him too. And he's an ordinary person, an ordinary hobbit, thrust into this huge, extraordinary world, and he's forced to learn as he goes, and we journey with him and we learn with him. And that's all of fantasy. Like, that's the crux of all fantasy. We get to learn with them. We get to journey with these characters. We get to discover things as they discover them too. It's a very small book. I think it's only about 300 pages, and it is just such a grand little story fit into such a small book. There's no info dumping. You get the story straight away, and it's just a very nice, easy little journey. It's light, it's funny, it manages to be exciting with high stakes. It doesn't get too dark and gritty. If you're put off thinking, fantasy is always violent, like Game of Thrones, lots of killing in that, the Hobbit is here to reassure you that that is not the case. Bursts with wonder, morality, magic, and charm. It's also a great example of a hero's journey, which is, much of fantasy based on the hero's journey. And I think The Hobbit and, obviously Tolkien's other work, The Lord of the Rings, was a blueprint for how the entire genre was written for the next near century. I saw J.R.R. Martin talking about this just recently in an interview, and he said, Tolkien created the blueprint for fantasy, and then, the next 50, 60 years of fantasy really just reflected his blueprint. So The Hobbit is a classic read regardless of genre or age or what you enjoy. It's also one of the most archetypal and acclaimed fantasy stories of all times, a delightful, soul-filling journey and a warm welcome into fantasy, and for anyone who's curious on where to begin. It's also great for kids too, by the way. It's a very good place to start kids on fantasy. Now, my next recommendation is from none other than one of my most formative authors, the very first author that we had on this podcast, the wonderful, the incredible Matthew Reilly, and it is the 7 Ancient Wonders. This is actually, it's modern fantasy, so it's set in the real world, and it's a perfect onboarding place for people who don't want to dive into a alternate realm. It's very easy to understand as it's set in the real world. It adheres to all the rules of physics that we know, that we've grown up with, that we live with day to day. And the 7 Ancient Wonders uses real history, our human history, as its foundation. It takes the real 7 wonders of the world and adds like a layer of fantasy and lost technology to them. For readers who enjoy historical fiction and non-fiction, this feels like a secret history of the world, and it makes a transition into fantasy elements feel grounded, believable, and not as foreign as a world filled with elves and goblins and trolls, etc. And the storytelling, Matthew Reilly, his storytelling is just 100 miles an hour. There are no long descriptions. There's no ancient language. There's no words to discover and understand. The fantasy elements of the world, which is, mythical artifacts, traps, conspiracies, global conspiracies, they're all delivered through this high stakes action that just drags you through it, whether you like it or not. And its magic is based on, physics and astronomy, which is an easier pill to swallow than a lot of, the really dense magic systems that we find in many ways. And Jack West Jr., a man, the main character and a man who I admire, and one of my role models, and I'm going to talk about that in a future episode when I talk about role models. But Jack West Jr., he leads this found family, this party on this world-saving quest, navigating politics and dangerous situations. And if you love it, the Seven Ancient Wonders continues through 6 more books all the way down to one. The books order themselves in 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's an incredible series, one of my favourite series. And Matthew Reilly is just amazing. This is a perfect gateway into reading. It's something that I recommend to men all the time because it reads like an action or a thriller. If you like those fast-paced movies, you will like this as a fast-paced book and an onboarding into fantasy. It's fantasy in the fast lane. Now, my third recommendation, a book that I've only read within the last year that completely blew me away. This book reminded me very much so of why I love fantasy and the joy that fantasy brings. Like this, the one word that I had for this book was just fun. This book is fun, and it has wit and banter and underworld crime capers that are performed by lovable rogues, and that is none other than The Lies of Locke, Lamora by Scott Lynch. Amazing book. One of my favourite reads from last year. Essentially, it's basically think Venice. Think medieval Venice with its canals and bridges and balls and the class structure mixed with the Italian Job or Ocean's 11. It's this heist. It's so much fun, and it's this little. It's a found family as well. It's this little group of young men who form friendship and family with each other, and who just love stealing, and they're little thieves, and they have this grand heist. It's such an incredible book. That's, as I said, it's just so much fun. And if you're used to reading books that are driven by really colourful characters and you love like friendship, you love the relationships between the characters with sharp dialogue, with really funny dialogue, you will love this book. The banter in this book is incredible. It is arguably like one of the funniest fantasy books that I've ever read. The dialogue, the prose of this book, it just had me laughing. Not even the dialogue at times, just the prose of this book, the way that Scott Lynch writes just had me feeling such mirth at times because it was just so fun. And the prose switches between past and present, and it does it in such an enjoyable way because you get one version of a scene and then you get the other version of the scene, and the way he writes it brings such humour to the situation because it's really funny to experience a scene in one way and then you experience it from a different perspective, and it makes it just so fun. So The Lies of Locke Lamora is it's not a magic heavy fantasy. This is for a great place to start for someone who wants a really character driven story, but I will also say that this book is really dark and gritty as well. This book has some quite coarse language, and it has some violence. So it is an entryway into, I suppose, balance that dark, gritty themes of fantasy with a very fun, enjoyable world that's not magic heavy. It's got great friendship, and it just delivers itself in such a clever way. No matter what you're into, you will just love these characters. Now, our next book, this for me, this is where I will say to you, this is an entry into fantasy that I think it's a great place to start if you want magic, if you want complex world building, if you want a complex magic system. This is a great place to start that does, the complex world and the complex magic system in an easy to grasp and understand way. And that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Now, if you aren't aware of who Brandon Sanderson is, Brandon Sanderson is probably considered the best, or one of the biggest epic fantasy author that we have alive today. His books are, he just crushes this entire genre, and his books and his storytelling are immense, and his worlds are just incredible. But this is a great place to start with Sanderson and start with, I would say, more complex epic fantasy. Brandon Sanderson is well known for his hard magic system. This means that the magic works in a very rigid way, and they exist by like very strict rules that everybody has to adhere to. When you read fantasy, the more the magic system, the larger the role that the magic system plays in the world, the more rigid structure it has to have. If it has a massive stake in the storyline, then it needs to have a very rigid structure to it to make it easy to understand. If the magic system plays less of a role in the story and a less of a role in the world, it can be a bit more ambiguous. But Brandon Sanderson's magic systems play huge roles in the world, and they are very structured. Mistborn, the magic is essentially like a science. Characters swallow these metal flakes, tin, pewter, steel, and then they burn them within inside of themselves, which gives them abilities. If you burn pewter, you get stronger. If you burn tin, your senses sharpen. Because the reader understands the cost and the limit of the magic, the fight scenes and how the magic is used literally feel like chess matches. It doesn't feel like two wizards going up against each other. It feels like two chess opponents versing each other. It's really well done. It removes the frustration of how do they do that, and it makes the world feel very grounded even though it's fantasy. There's also something that's really satisfying about Brandon Sanderson's magic systems in learning how they work, in discovering a magic system itself. There's something that I really enjoy about these hard magic systems is actually learning the mechanics of them. It makes it a really enjoyable experience, and seeing how those mechanics are used throughout the world and being manipulated by each magic user, how they use them differently. Sanderson also creates worlds that are really visually striking, like his landscapes and the continents and even the cultures of Sanderson's worlds are just really compelling, and it's such a great place to start with epic fantasy. Mistborn is one of the ultimate gateway fantasies because it replaces that the hand-wavy magic wand with really hard systems that are both structured and satisfying, combined with not too much darkness, but also worlds that have really, harsh consequences. All the while introducing you to one of fantasy's biggest names. So if you like Mistborn, I think Brandon Sanderson's written something like 60 books at this point, so there's plenty more to love if you love his writing. Now my next book, my final book for Where to Start with Fantasy. And this book, recommending this book always comes with quite a lot of criticism, because this is a trilogy that is not finished. And we've been waiting, I think now it's been about 13 or 14 years waiting for the third and final book. But the book is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Oh, this book is it. Like, this book is the most beautiful prose, the most poetic prose I think I've ever read in fantasy. This is for people who just love gorgeous storytelling. For anyone who thinks that fantasy is childish or escapism, this is the book that is the answer to you. Rothfuss's writing is just staggering. It's lyrical, it's rhythmic, it's dense, it has meaning, it has themes, it's compelling storytelling. And I never, ever flinch at recommending this book, because even though the series isn't finished, the first two books are just absolute must-reads if you're a lover of fantasy. This is just fantasy at its best. It's a book. I suppose I'll tell you about the story. I'll tell you about the story instead of just drooling over the incredible writing of it. So in the book, we have a weary old man who owns a tavern, and his name is Coat. And he starts telling his story. So it's told in the past tense. He starts recounting his story to a traveller who is chronicling his story. This also adds such an awesome element. The man in the tavern telling the story of his life. It's just one of my favourite mechanics. I think, the old person recounting details of their past life. And So Coate details the history of his life, and you follow his story, and it once again, this is a hero's journey. This is a story from weakness to strength. This is a story of mystery. This is understanding what's happened to him. He suffers a great loss early on in the book, and it's understanding that loss and trying to find his place in the world and trying to develop his strength. This is also a book that lovers of dark academia will love. There's an academy, a university in this book that is probably the best, academia storyline that I've ever read. I love this book. It's so much fun. It's dark, it's gritty, it's fantasy, it's magic. It's got everything. The lyrical nature of this book will just wrap you up in its wonder and drag you in. And even though this series is not finished, it is just an absolute must read. So if you're someone who thinks, if you're someone who loves like a lyrical prose, like honestly, can I tell you something? Like if you're someone who loves like a book like Hamnet, that really lyrical prose, that emotional book, like this is a book that you will love. The Name of the Wind is not super heavy on fantasy, but it's super heavy on emotion and storytelling and lyrical, flowery prose. It's very much like I found a lot of like Hamnet in this book. The Name of the Wind is a masterpiece of modern literature that also just happens to be set in a fantasy world. It's a book about how we become the stories that people tell about us. And it's written with a prose that, just feels like music. If you are yet to discover the joys of fantasy, truly, I'm really jealous of you. Like, I don't know where I stand on this. I wish in a way that I could wipe my mind of all the fantasy books I read and go back and start them all again and discover all these worlds and fall in love again with fantasy. But I think that every time I read a great fantasy book, I get to fall in love with fantasy again. So it's something that I experience continually through my life. When those books hit, and I think, The Lies of Lamora was a book that did this to me in the past year. You just read a fantasy book that hits you and you just fall in love with the genre all over again. If you've read these books, do you agree with me that they'd be great for first-time fantasy reads? And if you end up reading one of these and it's your first fantasy book, please let me know your thoughts. Reach out to me. Send me a voice note at goodbooks@9.com.au or just, get in contact with me. Let me know if you read one of these books and it makes you fall in love with fantasy, it's your first fantasy book, or even if you love fantasy and you've never read one of these books and you read it and it makes you feel the same way that I do, it reinvigorates and makes you fall in love with fantasy all over again. Please let me know. I love hearing from you. Please sending all your voice notes, even if it's not about fantasy, please send me voice notes. Once again, I would please ask you to subscribe to In the Good Books. It's the way that we grow the community. It's the way that we spread the love of books. It's the way that we spread this messaging, and it's the way that we get to enjoy talking to wonderful authors and people who love books and sharing books. It's just how we get to do everything that we all love as book lovers. So please hit the follow button right now. It is truly the best way to support me and show that everything we're trying to do here, bringing the joy and magic of readers to as many people as we can. I can't thank you enough. I look forward to the next chapter.